Hi everybody, Levi Clay here, back again. It's been a while. I've been away for a week on holiday. Had some scheduled videos, but it's not quite the same as being able to interact directly with you all. So I'm back for another question and answer video. This time the question comes from a friend of mine, Scott, on Facebook, who was asked about Shrapnel Records. So I'm going to read Scott's status and then I will give you my thoughts. So Scott says, surfing YouTube tonight looking for a little inspiration, and I came across a bunch of the old Shrapnel Records stuff. That was such an amazing time for guitar players, so many truly great players. Mike Varney had a scary ear for talent. So, who were your favourite Shrapnel guys? And his list, in no particular order, is Jason Becker, Richie Kotzen, Paul Gilbert, Michael Lee Firkins, and Greg Howe. It's such a great question when you think about it, because if you've not listened to that Shrapnel catalogue in a while, it conjures up all of those memories of being younger and listening to all of that stuff, at least for me. Now, I'm not quite as old as many of the people that I talk about music with. I'm 28, which actually is getting on a bit now, but I certainly can't honestly remember the times when the Shrapnel albums were coming out, and I can only imagine how exciting that must have been. I had a similar thing go on with the Shrapnel stuff because while I'm very much of the internet age, I didn't have the internet growing up. So I would read about a player like Paul Gilbert or Jason Becker and then somehow scrape together some money to buy a CD off the internet and wait 3 weeks for it to turn up, and then I would listen and listen and listen and listen to it. And yeah, those guys were a huge part of my development as a player. It would be difficult for me to not talk about the influence of Paul Gilbert. Paul Gilbert was my guy growing up. I absolutely loved Paul's playing. I'm Mistreated from the Racer X forums. I have always loved Paul's playing. Kind of moved away from it in more recent years, but that's just because he's not doing the stuff that I fell in love with as a teenager, the Racer X stuff. Was also massively into Cacophony. So that's obviously Jason Becker and Marty Friedman. As far as their solo careers go, I like Jason's material a lot more than Marty's material. In fact, I'm not really a huge fan of Marty Friedman's solo records. So yeah, and that's really what the Shrapnel stuff comes down to. It's not really a case of being able to list off anyone that I don't like. It's more a case of this album's for me, this one didn't grab me in the same way. But Scott makes a great point. Like, Mike Varney had a great ear for finding talent, and how has that changed today? Not just in regards to Mike, but in general. It's easier and easier to record music. There are so many talented players, but back in the day, you had to be a talented player and find somebody like Mike who was willing to front the money to help you record an album, and then somebody like Mike that had the ability to market your album and was willing to go out there and do the things that needed to be done to get you put onto that world stage type thing. Today, you don't need that money to make an album. Anybody can make an album in their home, and therefore the internet is flooded with albums of guitar music. And none of the people that are making those albums are willing to invest in the marketing side of things to go out and find an audience. And even if they were, that market's not really there anymore. And that's really sad. Is Mike partially to blame for that? Maybe. He flooded the market with so many great players. There were some truly uninspired players that did similar things during the time, and I'll talk about those guys at the end. But yeah, it was a golden era of shred, and if you're unfamiliar with the Shrapnel recordings, the Shrapnel Records artists, well worth checking these guys out. So if I just reel off names, Paul Gilbert, as I said, huge influence. Greg Howe was another player that I absolutely loved. I wasn't so into his first album, but Introspection is fantastic, and there's a track on there called Direct Injection, and the chorus in that jumped out. I was listening to a lot of Sean Baxter at the time. The chorus of that jumped out to me as being a great example of what Sean Baxter was doing, which was like, it was a bebop style heavy metal thing, and I loved that. So I was kind of hooked from there, and I still listen to a reasonable amount of Greg's stuff. His new album is excellent, actually. I also like his band that he had back in the day called How To. They had 2 albums. Was the first one called High Gear, or was it just called How To? It's got the song High Gear on it. And then, of course, there was their Now Hear This album. Not as good as the first one, in my opinion, but anyway. I also really like Greg's album with the band Marigold. I thought that was great too. So Greg, he has a huge amount of material. He was massively influential on me. And just opening my ears up to the idea that music didn't have to always just be neoclassical metal, because Greg obviously branched out that considerably. So next up, I'd have to say Jason Becker. Again, I was really into Cacophony, and Jason's Perpetual Burn album was cool. Less so with Perspective. Obviously, that's his compositions rather than his playing. It's more so Jason's playing which grabs me more than his compositions. I love him on that David Lee Roth album, A Little Ain't Enough. Some really cool playing on that. So yeah, Jason was a big influence on me. He's got a real playful personality in his playing. You can hear that. It's a lot of fun. Michael Lee Firkins was another big Shrapnel guy that I was really kind of into because of that debut album, self-titled album. I've transcribed that entire record actually for someone, so clearly there are a lot of guys out there that like that sound. Michael was very different to the other Shrapnel guys because there's only a few fast licks on that album, but it's a great album full of great songs, great touch. And the last guy I'll throw in the list of players that I kind of really enjoyed from that era would be Vinnie Moore. Not so much for the records, I mean they're great, but his instructional videos that he put out were fabulous, and it really put my jaw on the floor when I saw what that guy was capable of. I learnt a lot from Vinny's way of phrasing, so definitely a big fan of Vinny. Then as you come down a little bit further, right in the middle of really like and I'm less interested in is Richie Kotzen. Richie, fantastic voice, fantastic guitar player, but his instrumental material never really grabbed me. I can't really think of anything that jumped out and I fell in love with. I've been to see Richie play several times live though, and if he's in town I'll always go and see him because again it's Richie Kotzen. He's a great player and he's got a great voice on the instrument and a singing voice. So it's not a case of I don't like Richie Kotzen, it's just compared to those other artists on the Shrapnel roster, I was listening to more of those than Richie Kotzen. Marty Friedman I already mentioned. Joey Tafoya, again, certainly not a bad player. He's got a great REH video and I've enjoyed watching that. Very cool approach to playing. I like his playing, but just back in the day, that album just didn't grab me in the same way that some of the others did. And I guess Tony McAlpine would be another name to throw out there. Didn't grab me much, though I did like the Mars album. I thought that was quite cool. That band album that he did. As you can tell, I was always more into the bands that these guys were doing. Paul Gilbert did Racer X, Greg Howe did How To, and Jason Becker and Marty Friedman had the Cacophony thing. I always liked that song aspect of things. That was always very cool to me. So yeah, the Mars album I enjoyed, but a lot of Tony's material didn't grab me in the same way that some of the other guys did. I don't know how I haven't mentioned Malmsteen, of course, because Mike's obviously hugely important in the history of bringing Malmsteen to the attention of the public, and that Steeler album is very, very cool. I mean, what more can I say? It's Mike fucking Varney. He's one of the most important people for shred guitar. He did so much for our instrument, both positive and potentially, as I say, negative, just in terms of flooding the market, because everybody wanted to be like these shredders. They wanted to be the next covers of Guitar World, and that resulted in, your Guy Mandudes of the world who just there's just nothing that grabs you as being incredibly cool. But then you've got guys like Derek Taylor and Scott Stein and Brett Stein and all of those, Rusty Cooley, the Texas guys. I'm just reeling off Texas guys there. And then guys that would be on Mark Varney's label, Legato, guys like Brett Garsed, Scott Michaud. I really, really like Scott Michaud. There was a lot of good that came from Shrapnel and a lot of not so good. But certainly part of guitar history that I do look back on fondly, and I can always stick on a Shrapnel record and enjoy myself. So there you go, I've rambled for long enough. Would be really interested to know what you guys think. Shrapnel records, who are your favourite Shrapnel recording artists? Which albums really grabbed you? Which albums didn't? Can you think of any players that came after the Shrapnel thing that are deserving? And can you think of any artists that kind of helped to kill shred guitar? Certainly interested in your opinion. You can let me know in the comments box below. Lastly, as always, huge thank you to these guys. Oh, they're over there. Ooh. My patrons over on Patreon. These guys all support me at a $10 tier, so thank you very much for that. It helps to support my channel. I've got lots of cool stuff coming up, and the way to make that cool stuff happen is to have the money to fund that. I need to buy more equipment. Well, here's a hint. I need more microphones. I need more of these set up in my studio for something that I'm looking at starting, and these things aren't cheap. So these guys here are directly helping that to happen. So huge thank you to you guys. You are very cool. And if you would like to support this channel, as I say, you can do so by checking me out on Patreon by clicking this button up here. You can support me over there for as little as $1. It all helps. It's amazing having people watch my channel. I do appreciate it. You don't need to financially support me. You can help me out just by clicking the subscribe button and telling your friends about my channel, and also checking out 2 more of my videos here and here. Thank you so much for the support, guys, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.